That's a very subtle thing that people are not discussing, is when you have three unselfish players, sometimes one of those guys needs to step up. Kevin Garnett is not the guy who's going to be aggressive offensively. He likes to play off of other people. Is Ray Allen going to step up, or is Ray Allen going to be a wallflower? Ray Allen is a shooter, but that's not all he does. He's an all-around player, and being an all-around player gets you into the flow of a game. And not being that same all-around player and just standing around the perimeter might take him out of his game and make him less effective. And it may only knock him down a notch, but it makes him not be what Ray Allen was. You know, so they're going to have to deal with that too. But let's say they put it all together and they play well. Look at that team as a whole. Rajon Rondo, I think, is going to be fine at point guard. He's not a great leader at point guard, and that's going to hurt them. All right, but he's a good defensive guard. He can rebound. He can pass it a little bit. He can change the game defensively with his steals. But I don't really see that as a whole in their lineup as much as other people do. The whole of the point guard position comes at the backup point guard position. You know, Eddie House is actually not their backup point guard. Tony Allen will be their backup point guard, and sometimes even Ray Allen, who played backup point guard in Seattle sometimes a couple years ago. But having Tony Allen, who can play some backup point guard a little bit, but having him at the point guard position takes away his scoring, which he showed last year he can do. Tony Allen is a very talented player. He came out of his shell last year and got hurt on a retard play where he hurt his knee after the whistle trying to dunk the ball, and he's going to be struggling with that coming into this season. He's still trying to find his way. He's still trying to find his athleticism, but he's also a guy who at the shooting guard or small forward position can put points on the board for you. And if you're asking him to be the backup point guard, you're not asking him to give you anything offensively. Not to say, let's not go to extremes. He's going to give them something, but he's not going to be as aggressive as he would have been if he was the backup two guard or small forward. Now, Eddie House is a guy, that was Danny Ainge's first signing. And I don't know, Danny Ainge might have something, a special place in his heart for Eddie House or something. Eddie House is not a guy that I think you should be counting on in your first 7 or 8 players. And that's what they're asking him to do. They're asking him to be their shooting guard on offense coming off the bench. Eddie House is not a scorer. He's a streak shooter. He's not even a solid pure shooter. He's a streak shooter, and he needs to take a lot of shots sometimes to find his way. That's not exactly what you're looking for. He can be instant offense sometimes, but defensively he can be, he can drag you down because he's going to have to guard the point guard, not the shooting guard. He's not a great defensive player. He's not a poor one, but he's not great. I know there's no special skill I think that Eddie House brings to the table that they could not have found elsewhere. Now I know Celtics, over the cap, they didn't have a lot of options to fill out that bench, but Ainge needed to shake the bushes and find somebody from the NBDL, an NBA vet who had been around and hadn't been in the league the last couple of years. Look at what the Pacers did with Kareem Rush. They dug Kareem Rush up this season and signed him early in the summer. Players like that exist in this league. These are guys who have been through some of the wars in the NBA and just aren't talented enough to be a GM's favorite coming into every season, but these guys can fill in coming off the bench, and they could have done better than Eddie House. I was very disappointed with that signing. The next signing was Scott Pollard. Scott Pollard, you could say he's an underrated player. He does a lot of dirty work, but here's a guy that's barely ever on the court. And every team he's on, he sits on the bench. That's your second signing. That's who you want to fortify your front line. They could have done better than that. If you look at the rest of their front line bench, you're talking about Scalabrine. He can hit the outside jumper, but doesn't do much else. He has some experience, playoff experience, but he's not the type of player that you should be counting on coming off the bench. Their center, I believe, is a decent center. I think he's being a little underrated right now. He can block shots. He can rebound. There's a lot of things that he can do on the court that's going to complement what they have in the scoring of the big three. And let's talk about the big three for a minute. Let's not forget James Posey. James Posey was his best signing. It was Ainge's best signing of the summer. It gives them a lot of options defensively. His outside shot, by far their best signing, and it gives them 2 key reserves for this team that's very weak on the bench. But those you're just looking at 2 key guys, and the third guy that to me is a little suspect in Eddie House. That's not enough. If the Eastern Conference was as weak as everyone said they are, or everyone says they are, then it might be enough. But they're not as weak as everyone thinks they are. And those big three are going to have to work their butts off to beat teams every day in this league. And if you look at the preseason, I don't like to put a whole lot of stock in the preseason, but they played the New York Knicks, who are on again, off again type of team. They came at the Knicks real hard in their first preseason game and whipped them 40 points. You say, okay, it's preseason, you know, the Knicks sometimes they're not focused. The next game, they tried to come out and do it again. And if you watch that game was played with a lot of intensity. The Knicks were out there to win it. The Celtics were out there to win it. It was played with the regular season flavor to it. And there were only a couple guys who were playing that probably won't be in rotation during the year for the Knicks. And you know the Knicks are a very deep team. So you're talking about guys like Fred Jones who are in the game. And Fred Jones is going to make a difference every now and then for the Knicks. He's a good player. They played that game with a lot of intensity, and the Celtics came up short. And you're going to see that throughout the season. You're going to see the Celtics losing to teams that everyone thinks they shouldn't lose to because everyone thinks these teams are so much below them. But when you get out on the court, it doesn't matter if you have 3 All-Stars out there because not all of them can shoot at the same time. And defense can shut these guys down on a nightly basis in the regular season, and it can mean losses for this team. And you're looking at the second half of the season, you're looking at a weak bench, so the starters are going to have to log more minutes to win games than people think, and they're going to start to wear down, I believe. These are older players, and each, you know, Kevin Garnett doesn't get hurt that much, but Paul Pierce and Ray Allen get nagging injuries every now and then. Ray Allen has a bulky ankle. You know, they come into the second half of the season, if any one of those guys get hurt, and all of a sudden the Celtics are going to dominate as everyone thinks they are. They have to be real lucky to, number one, like I said, to attain the chemistry necessary to be a championship team because they don't have the bench at all. You look at teams that are really championship contenders, they are deep teams and they have chemistry, they've been together for a minute. The Celtics have none of that, so they're going to have to be lucky in chemistry, they're going to have to be lucky in injury, and they're going to have to go into the playoffs